Hey everyone, welcome to Dev Interrupted. This is your co-host Connor Bronston, and today we're joined by Hywel Carver, an experienced CTO and now founder and CEO at Skiller Whale. Hywel, welcome to the show.
Hi, Connor. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And you're joining us from London today, is that right?
I am in North London, where it is grey and dull.
Well, I'm over in the Seattle area, so same deal here. So it's a pleasure to have you to talk to and kind of dive into some interesting info to brighten both of our days. You've identified a problem that I think everyone in the audience can relate to, that knowledge isn't as sticky as what we'd like it to be. I'm sure we've all felt this, and there's different statistics on the subject, but it's often noted that a person only remembers about 10% of a book within 2 weeks of reading it. And that can make it kind of difficult to learn and retain new skills, especially when the subject is coding. So that's why we're going to chat today, right? About what it takes to actually learn a new skill, put it into practice, and how. If you're an engineering leader, you can build more skills in your existing team without having to hire more people. So let's jump right in. Hywel, why is it so difficult to learn something new, and what's going on in the brain when that happens?
So the reason it's difficult to learn something new is because the things have to be right in order to learn. We are generally not very good at optimizing the sort of scenario around us for the best learning. So in your intro, you talked about both reading a book and development of skills, which I would say are actually quite separate things. Like reading a book is a good way of getting knowledge and information, which is necessary to get a skill, but it's not sufficient. If you want the skill,
It's only the baseline.
Right, exactly. It doesn't get you able to do, it gets you able to maybe understand at best. To do the thing, to actually have the skill and to be able to put it into practice, you need to be doing it. You need to have a go, you need to fail and get feedback on that skill. And if you think about any kind of critical application where we care about skills a lot, that's pretty much exactly what happens. If you're training to be an airline pilot, they don't just have you read the manual and then sort of stick you in a plane. There's thousands of hours in flight simulators, which are constantly giving you feedback and letting you see the results of your actions and putting you in different scenarios and giving you the opportunity to kind of respond to those and improve your skills before they let you actually fly the plane. I think that is generally emblematic of how we should approach all skill learning. We need the knowledge, but we also need to put it into practice and do the thing before we can expect to have the skill. And so this is why, to come back to your question, why it's difficult to learn something new. It's because often we conflate those things together and we think, well, I've read the book, I should be able to do the thing. And there's actually this gap in between, which is that trial and error and feedback process.
And to your point, there's also the challenge around the baseline actual learning in order to apply it, right? Where every human has different conditions around what makes the right situation for them to learn. How do you think about the differences that personality and personal differences play in how quickly someone picks up a new skill or the baseline learning to start putting that skill into practice?
So this is super interesting because there is a commonly believed myth about people having a kind of a personal type. So some people believe that they are like a kinesthetic learner. Some people believe they're a visual learner. They need to see things in order to learn. And the research and all of the evidence points to the fact that there is no meaningful effect on learning outcomes. There's no discernible impact on how well you learn something if you learn according to the type that you think you are. You might enjoy it more. You might have that preference for that type, but you might not. It doesn't change how well you learn it. However, at a given time, there might be a situational thing where learning this particular thing, you need to see it visually. That's just what's going to be best for you. This other thing you need to hear, that's going to be best for you. It's very situational is the thing. It's not about you as an individual, which all comes back to this idea that you want to give people the opportunity to learn in different ways. So Personally, I'm a strong believer of having people be able to listen as well as read, and when necessary, have like access to visuals to help kind of draw out the map of what they're learning and bring things into place. Stronger than that, though, is the kind of format of the learning itself. So all of the things I've talked about so far are what you call passive learning, where you are given access to some kind of material and you consume it, which might mean reading a book, watching a video. There's a layer above that, which is what's called active learning. In active learning, you are interacting with the materials themselves. So with a video, you might kind of be taking, like making bookmarks at specific points through the video. With a book, you might be highlighting passages. That's what's called active learning. The layer above that, which gets even better learning outcomes, is what's called constructive learning. And in constructive learning, that's the point where you're putting things into practice. So you're not just absorbing it passively, you're not just interacting with the materials actively, you are building something with the thing that you're learning immediately. And then the best form of learning, the one that caps all of the others, is what's called interactive learning, which is that you are, when you're building something, but then you also have the opportunity to discuss it with other humans. That's the thing that gives us the kind of strongest effects of learning. I don't know the sort of neurobiology behind it, but I believe what happens is that we get, essentially a lot of our learning is tied to emotion. So there's this, it's what's called the affective model of learning, that we remember things and we remember how to do things because of emotions that we experience. Like our memories for those are hooked onto an emotional resonance. And if you think about your experience of like reading a book or sitting in a lecture or watching a video, for me, the most common emotion I would attach to that is boredom. Whereas the idea of building something is like a strongly satisfying feeling. And at least as an engineer, as a software developer, the idea of making something is exciting. The idea of making something and sharing it with other people and talking about how we made it is the most kind of emotionally resonant for me. It's the ones with the strongest emotions. And so I think that's why we see interactive learning is getting the best results. But I don't think that's kind of evidenced.
That's really interesting because I can say for myself, I often need to feel that confidence of having read the book first. I enjoy reading. I enjoy like reading about new skills or fantasy novels. I have to admit, I love a good like Lord of the Rings, something like that. But when I dive into a new subject, I want to kind of read and consume first before I put that into practice. And that's just more of a like a mental confidence thing. But I totally agree with you. And I think the research really shows what you're saying, which is to actually understand that skill and learn it, I have to do the hands-on building, have to do the learning. And that part is the fulfilling part afterwards. But at least mentally, I have this staging thought where I feel like I need to do something one way first in order to feel as confident as I want to. But to your point earlier, it sounds like that's more about my personal viewpoint on what's going to make me feel good about how I'm approaching something versus necessarily what's going to be most effective.
So I actually think you need both. And also on the fantasy novels, I've just recently got into Brandon Sanderson. And like, if you haven't,
yeah, very
incredible.
much.
Like, I'm only a few books in, but like, wow.
What are you reading right now from him?
It is the third one in the, what's it called? The Stormlight Archive.
Stormlight Archive? Oh, great.
Yeah.
Once you get to Words of Radiance, let me know.
That's the second one. I've just finished Words of Radiance.
Great. Okay. Yeah.
And it was, a lot of bombshells at the end. And Yeah.
So I don't want to turn this into a book podcast. I know I sidelined us here.
when you start that second podcast, let me know. Okay, I will be there.
You should check out Mistborn by him too. No, another series, really good. So
yeah, my brother has recommended that to me. I think they're also a lot shorter. So yeah. So you 100% need the passive learning first. That's what I was going to say. You need to understand what you're doing before you put it into practice. So I don't disagree with what you're saying at all. Because otherwise what you're doing is you're setting people up to fail. If you're saying, go and solve this problem, but you give people none of the kind of knowledge and information they need to do that, they are going to fail. That's the equivalent of putting the pilot in the flight simulation, not telling them what the controls do. It's not going to work for anyone, and you are going to harm people's confidence. I would think of it more as about cycle time. So we think about cycle time in development as, like between a thing being requested, scheduled to be worked on, and then we get it into prod. And that's like roughly our cycle time definition. With learning, I think the cycle time is about how long it is before we get the information of what we're doing, put it into practice of the skill, and then get feedback on that skill. If you think about read a book, watch a video, typically what happens is people do that often in their spare time, is how it's set up as part of their work. And then they might get the opportunity to put that into practice maybe a week later, 2 weeks later, maybe a day later, at which point they're far away from the learning environment. Anytime
you've already lost a chunk of that learning.
You've already lost a chunk. You don't have anyone to go to for help, unless you count Stack Overflow, but I don't really believe in learning by copy and paste. And so I don't think you're going to learn from that. You might now know the right terms to Google for, and therefore you find a better Stack Overflow answer. I don't know that I think you're learning a skill by finding that Stack Overflow answer. I think really effective learning makes that feedback happen almost instantaneously. So it's like not kind of even You think about if you go on a course, if you go on a training course, often what they'll do is they'll give you like 6 or 7 hours of material, and then there's a kind of 2 hour long session at the end where you put it into practice. I think you can do better than that. I think you can, in the course of an hour, tell people a small bit of the passive information, the first couple of paragraphs from the chapter of the book, if you like, and then give people a problem to solve and put it into practice and have them do that thing. And then you give them the next level of kind of complexity. Well, we didn't tell you this before, but there's this other kind of layer to what you're learning that we've not talked about. Here's how that works. Now go and solve this problem with it. And so you're reducing that cycle time of learning from like the sort of the go read a book model, which is like maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks long, to the course model, which is maybe like 6 hours long, to the live coaching model, which is maybe 5 minutes long. So you still get that opportunity to read, understand, ask questions, and then you immediately get that opportunity to solve a problem with it, at which point you're ready to learn the next layer of complexity of the thing that you're trying to learn.
That definitely resonates with me because that coaching piece of having immediate feedback, getting to put the skill into practice and then go, oh, here's how I tweak it. I mean, that's certainly been my best experiences with learning. My question is, does this apply equally across all disciplines? For example, would a manager who's trying to learn new communication skills forget those skills at the same rate as an engineer might forget a new programming language they don't practice? Or is there differentiation between what people colloquially call like hard and soft skills?
That's interesting. So I don't know about the fall off of the kind of retention of the skill. My own experience has always been that with skills are like riding a bike, in that riding a bike is a skill. And it's the kind of thing where if you don't do it for a while, I don't know when I last rode a bike actually, but I reckon I'd get back on a bike and I'd remember how to ride.
Sure.
I also
Yeah.
haven't written any, I don't know, C++ for a good few years. But I think like give me a day of writing in C++ and I reckon I'd be not far off the level I was when I stopped. And I think it's the same with soft skills. I'm trying to think of, so I have this like lifelong mission to rebrand them as power skills because I think they're soft undersells them. So I'm going to call them power skills. And I think I can't think of power skills that I don't really use anymore. But my feeling is that it would be the same kind of thing of returning to the skill and slowly getting back into it and being roughly where I was before.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like the example I'm thinking of maybe would be something like selling or fundraising, where
Mm.
it's something that maybe you only do every couple of years if you're a startup leader, or maybe you don't do after you stop being a founder and you go work in another role. But coming back to it, you'd still retain a lot of that skill about, like, okay, how do I approach this? How do I pitch? And I mean, to be fair, you're probably doing selling day to day, even if you're not selling to customers, maybe you're pitching other internal teams to support initiatives. So maybe part of that is these power skills you are using often in your day to day because they just relate to human interaction.
Yeah, I think that's true. Actually, I think that's a fair point. Like, I am amazed at how much overlap there is in managing and leading teams and companies, and like being in a band. Like the number of kind of HR problems that come up in like a small space of time when
Oh,
you're in a band,
totally.
and you're just like, "Ah, okay, like
Are
I've
you in a
basically put
band?
my
I gotta
work
know
out.
now.
I was in a band before
Okay.
the pandemic, and then I moved away from central London. It became unsustainable to traveling for practices.
All right. Well,
But
we'll
yeah,
have
the
to
people in
plug
that
your
band, they
band.
know who they are. They know I'm talking about them.
Okay. Okay. All right. So before the call, you had mentioned that you have children. And I know you have some thoughts around the applications of how children learn to understanding the way adults learn. What have your children taught you about what it means to learn a new skill and how intuitive or what kind of process they use?
Yeah, and what amazes me is that it is exactly the same. It's not something I bring up often because I think it feels condescending. Like I think most adults don't want to hear that the way that they would learn to write software is very similar to the way that children learn. But I think it really is. I have a 1 3/4 year old daughter and a nearly 5 year old son, and they're both talking now, which is wonderful. Like there is nothing I love more than hearing them talk. Actually, it's great. But you really see the way they pick up both vocabulary, which is a form of knowledge and information, and skills, which is the kind of how to of stuff. So vocabulary, my son will hear us talking about something, 3 weeks ago. He will bring up the word now today, having not heard it for
Mm.
ages. And that's because knowledge you can learn passively. You can learn knowledge just by absorption. And one of the best ways to learn knowledge is what's called, oh, I'm going to forget the way, it's like phased recall, but one of those words is slightly wrong. But essentially, you basically get tested on the same thing again and again at increasing intervals of time between each test, unless you get it wrong, in which case the interval gets smaller. Really efficient way to learn knowledge. And that is essentially how school works for my son, is he's learning to read, and they will essentially do that kind of like regular drill of the different sounds in words, and then they just absorb that passively. The skill is in the doing. And so the skill of actually being able to read is then putting those phonics into the practice, those sounds that he's learned, so that when he reads a word, he is like associating what he sees with the word. And you see how quickly they go around that feedback loop. Like a child is incredibly fast. It's a machine optimized for learning and going around this loop of, I tried something, I failed, someone told me the right thing to do, and now I'm getting better. And you see that in walking. There is a strong feedback loop when they fall over and get hurt while walking around. You see that in speech when they get corrected, or when they've misunderstood a word and a grown-up says, this is actually what that thing means, or you meant to say this. You can see sometimes in real time, like my son will start a sentence and then will correct himself partway through. And so you can see, like, I don't think he's kind of consciously doing that, but a sort of mechanism inside his brain is putting that feedback loop into action. So yeah, to me, the parallels feel really clear, but I worry that it sounds like infantilizing to people to be told that they learn in the same way as children. But I think they do. I think we all do.
And I would say children have some advantages too around feedback loops, to your point, where as an adult, with small children, you're probably very aware of, oh, this piece of vocabulary is wrong. They have a coach who is there, who's helping them a lot, and they get those tight feedback loops that really help them learn aggressively. And you also see less masking behavior usually of like, oh, I'm not confident in a skill, let me avoid it, because they don't. I'm going to say they don't know better, but they're just kind of going into it. They're building up skills. And I think once you hit I don't know about a certain age, but as you kind of transform through society, you have to like have different behaviors to try to show confidence in skills, whereas children are often just trying to approach and say, hey, I'm just trying to learn. I don't have any of that exterior stuff to worry about.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that we are generally good at creating for children, is that environment where failure is safe and encouraged. And not every environment is like that for adults, right? In some companies, it's very clear that it's okay to fail. It's okay to try things and for them to not work. And in other companies, if you try things and they don't work, then you will have no chance of advancement. You'll have no chance of promotion or even get fired.
How do you think engineering leaders should create that kind of environment for their teams where it's okay to fail and learn?
So I think that is really about working culture and the things that you value in your company culture. There's this theory of, it's called the fifth discipline, the learning organization, an organization that is really well adapted for learning. And part of that is that learning has to happen on all kinds of levels, right? The best companies are ones that are actively learning and understanding more about the customers they're selling to, but also about the ways that they need to build their product. And that comes right back down to the actions of individual software developers, that they need to be getting feedback on what they're doing and learning from it and improving, which I imagine is something that's very relevant to what Linear B does, right?
Absolutely. Do you see, or it sounds like you see problems with how new skills are often taught today and the environmental approach for a lot of teams in how they enable skill learning?
So I think I would twist that slightly on its head. I think people don't try and have their team learn skills because their experience has led them to believe that it is not possible to effectively learn skills on the job, which honestly, for the sort of standard ways of learning, I think is true. If you look at the kind of learning landscape, I think there's a very big bucket of learning, which I would call e-learning. It's the kind of online access to libraries of videos and content that you can access, which is really well optimized for people to go and understand new things, research things, broaden their horizons, investigate things they're interested in or passionate about that aren't really related to their work. You're probably not going to get a new skill that way unless you have the time to put it into practice in your spare time, or maybe your work gives you like 20% time to spend a day a week trying that thing out. But you're not going to get an actionable skill from that content. And then there's another kind of broad part of the market, which is classroom-based learning. So this is the kind of, let's go on a course for a few days. We're all going to be in the same room with
Our whole team's going to take a Scrum course or something.
Right, exactly. So we're all going to go. We've got our kind of Prince 2 certified person at the front, trainer at the front of the room. They're going to take us through a course of like 5 days of Scrum training, which is not well optimized for people to actually learn new skills from. It's well optimized to give you access to an expert, to get understanding, to potentially try things out. But again, those models are really great for the trainer, honestly. That's such an amazing model to be a trainer in, because you can bring everyone together. You're often charging by the head, although that's not going to be true in every case. And so to get everyone in a room, you've got to book the space. There's a bit of admin, but the margins as a trainer are amazing.
Great business model, not necessarily great for students.
Not great. I don't think it gets the best learning outcomes. And that's because by necessity, that model requires you to be generic. I can't specialize to each person in the room, because there are so many of them if you're a trainer standing at the front of that room. I don't want to take away from those trainers. I think they are often highly skilled people, really expert in what they're doing with very good intentions. But the standard model for learning that they essentially get pushed into is not one that gets great outcomes. And I think if you're an engineering leader looking around at this landscape, why would you think that there is great learning available that is going to change the shape of what your team can actually do? There's learning available that's going to give your team the opportunity to explore their interests and their kind of coding as a hobby side of their lives. And there's learning which I think is great for compliance personally, like that kind of classroom training. If I have a tick box exercise that says everyone needs to be trained in GDPR or HIPAA or ISO 27, or maybe that's a bad example, but some kind of security compliance, say, that kind of course is perfect for that. I can just pay my fee, get everyone certified at the end that they completed the course, and then I have proven that we kind of tick the box on our compliance regime that says we have to provide that training.
But it's not necessarily developing great skills.
It isn't. So I think you can do the course for the kind of security compliance, but then you also need to get the skills in the team, which is an orthogonal task. Like if you want to actually have a secure web application, leave the course behind. Like come to the course when you need the compliance tick box. If you want your web app to be secure, invest in people's skills, or invest in people. The typical model we go for is not invest in people's skills, but invest in new people who already have those skills. We look for the person who's already spent 10 years securing web apps, and we bring them into the company rather than take our existing people and give them the kind of security skills that they need.
Do you see that as the right approach?
It's not a cost-effective approach. But again, in a world where you don't have great, effective learning, it probably is the right approach. It's probably the best way to do that. Otherwise, and this was one of the impetuses for me starting Skill a Whale. Otherwise, the way that you solve that problem is, if you're not going to hire, you have to take it on. You have to be the one who sits with your team and coaches them and upskills them in the stuff that you know, or you have to rely on your network to come and either find freelancers or consultants or agencies who can come in and do a kind of fix-up job for you that you can then try and maintain over time. In a world without learning that solves that problem with your existing people, you need outside help.
So let's use a thought exercise to kind of frame how you would approach the building a skill set across a team. If I approached you and asked you to help my team learn something, let's say learning React Native as an example, where would you start?
Excellent question. So I talked a bit about the different models of learning I see out in the world. At Skill a Whale, we developed a new one for exactly this reason, because honestly, I just wanted a way of getting my existing people to have the skills that I needed to see in the team. And live team coaching is the way that we do that, which is not the same as e-learning. It's not the same as the kind of training course approach. The idea is, firstly, we want to make sure that you're not going to spend any time on learning that isn't relevant to the company's strategy. So I think learning should be targeted to individual skill gaps, but get the team level outcome that's required. So if you want to learn, if you want your team to learn React Native, I would start by working out which areas of React Native matter to you. And I would also start by working out the individual skill gaps of each person in your team. So maybe
So
you're
a
already
customized approach per person on the team.
yes, and per company, right? That's the other thing is people. There's existing organizations that will customize per person that will say, we've looked at your skill set and you are in the intermediate group, so you go into bucket number 2, and then there's a bucket either side of you, and we're going to take each of those buckets through the same. Each person in the beginner group goes through this generic course. Each in the intermediate goes through that generic course, which is a little bit of an optimization for the company, but it means some tedium for the learners. And I think boredom is the opposite of learning, right? And I think that in order to learn effectively, you want to be very, very granular. So I don't want to know, do you know TypeScript? Do you know React? But you don't know React Native? Great, we'll start on React Native day one. I want to know, well, which bits of React do you know and don't you know? Which bits of React Native do you know and not know? Like, you understand that the fundamental model, the idea of having, two threads, your like native thread and your JavaScript thread, and you understand the way the bridge works between two different bits of code running at the same time, but you don't really understand the idea of a text component, which is like really core part of React Native. Great, we're going to start there with you. The person next to you is completely different. And so that's how I would target individual skill gaps for that team level outcome. I would then have you solve problems that are specific to the current area that we're working on. So that example of the text component, I would start by giving you an app to work on. I would tell you some stuff about the text component, tell you some of the properties it has, the ways you can style the text. And then I'd have you go and solve a problem in the app. Like, here is some text on the screen. We want this text to be red and bold. And then I'd tell you about the way that those things nest. So the way text components work in React Native is that in a text component, you can put a text component inside another one, which means it then inherits all of those style properties. If you don't do that, like, two sibling text components will render on separate lines from each other. And so I'll say, now go and make one of those words italic as well, for example. It's like a slightly boring example. I'd like to think we'd come up with a more fun one, something a bit more realistic to an application. But the point is, you're going to be solving problems. And while you're doing that, we're going to give you a live coach who is there not just to answer your questions and not just to check that you've understood, but also to help you debug your code, because you're quite new to
The
React
feedback
Native
loop you talked about earlier.
Right. So they're going to be able to see your code live every time you save the file, and they'll be able to say, just so you know, the way that you've defined that style will work, but if you want to be kind of more future-proof, you might choose to do it this way instead. And then lastly, I think that a really key component is that all of that learning is going to happen in working hours. It's not something that's left to be a kind of hobby in your spare time, but it's also going to be in small time units, because you're a working developer. You've got a lot of other stuff to be getting on with, but also you need an opportunity to put in place what you've learned. So I think a lot of existing learning, like if you think about the e-learning model, it's very much like on demand. Next time you have a free hour, come back and we'll show you the next video. The classroom course is kind of the opposite. It's like, here is a fire hose of new information, and at some point you're going to go and put that stuff into practice. I think there is a sweet spot in the middle where you get that kind of 60 to 90 minutes of new ideas, live feedback, and you come away with, now I know this thing. I didn't even understand anything about the text component before, didn't know what it was, didn't know how to use it. And now that is a thing that I very concretely and fully understand, and I can go and start using that. And then when you've had a week or 2 weeks of feeling like the master of the text component, that's when you learn the next thing. And that's when you kind of take the next step on that journey. That's how you would optimize learning to get you very deeply skilled at a thing that you didn't know before, really confident in it because you've had that constant ability to get feedback and you've had the chance to put it into practice before any more complexity was added. And we've ensured that it's targeted to what you need and what your team needs you to know.
How would you track success and say, okay, great, this project is done, we've succeeded, or we have more work to do?
Yeah, interesting. So I think learning has success in multiple levels. So the standard approach is what's often in the industry called a happy sheet. At the end of learning, we give you the happy sheet, and if you're happy, we call that a success. That is generally a good first step. That's a good proxy towards long-term impact. It seems to be the best short-term measure you can get of the impact of learning. What gets exciting is the sort of medium-term measures. So I think of learning as is always a means to a like a not directly commercial end. The question is what that end should be. So if you think about the kind of video library type learning, the e-learning, that has the end of reducing the churn of my employees. That's the kind of the most commercial thing we can tie that to. Learning that makes your team more skilled will have a goal. For you, learning React Native, that might be, we want to be able to support fewer code bases. We want to be able to like close down our old Java and Objective-C code bases and just have a single unified app on two different platforms. It might be that you're already a back-end developer and a front-end developer, and we want you to be able to work on the mobile app as well. So the actual medium-term outcome from you learning React Native might be really different depending on what the overall commercial goal is. But I think good learning is about looking at that and keeping that aim in mind and tracking it. It's not enough to just say, well, Connor came to the sessions, all the happy sheets said that Connor was really delighted to be learning about React Native. But at the end of the day, the apps haven't changed. We're still supporting two apps. Like Connor's not confident in working React Native in his work. He's still sticking to, I don't know, the back end, Kubernetes and Ruby. And in that case, I think that's a failure of learning. I think you have to see that impact in.
I like that you're aligning
measures.
this to the goals of the enterprise, right? So you see this in individual life too, right? Or maybe I am learning carpentry to build a table because I want to, custom build a table, and I need to build some skills for it. But I may not need all these other pieces of skills because I'm trying to do a certain task or achieve a certain goal. And so that alignment to what I should spend time on, as far as what's going to be efficient for me learning wise and successful outcomes, is really crucial. So I think there's a lot of time that gets spent, especially in these e-learning courses you've talked about, where maybe I'm just reviewing material that I'm never going to put into practice, and it's not actually going to help achieve the goal. It's just kind of contextual. And that can be important at times, but it's often overdone.
Or worse, even worse than that, like I agree that is bullshit and a waste of your time. Worse than that is stuff that you've already know, because so many of these things are set up to be like, okay, well, you're on this path now. Great news. We found the path for you. The first 3 hours are just stuff that you know. There might be a nugget in there that you didn't already.
Am I listening by the time it gets to the stuff that I don't know?
Did you even bother sitting through it, or did you just skip to the end of the videos?
Yeah,
it's just a waste. It's just a waste of people's time. And to your point about like aligning to company goals, I think that the vast majority of training that exists is second order away from cost reduction. So the kind of compliance training that we need to tick this box helps us reduce the risk of being told we're kind of in breach of contract. We're not keeping up with the regime we're meant to be compliant with. It's that kind of legal risk reduction. The e-learning is about reducing the cost of churn, the cost of people leaving the company and therefore having to be replaced. Live team coaching is second order away from increasing revenue. We think we can increase revenue by having an app where we can ship features faster. And we're going to do that by having more people, including this team over here, be very good at React Native. And that's the way that live team coaching works, is to look at improving revenue and therefore profitability through learning rather than decreasing costs through learning.
So I'd love to close out this conversation by talking a bit about explicitly applying these techniques to an engineering team. This thought exercise has been really helpful, and I've loved the info you've given us in the background. But let's be explicit. What's the best way for engineers to learn new skills?
The best way for engineers to learn new skills is to have the opportunity to learn the base knowledge, put it into practice, and get immediate feedback from an expert. So this is one of the things we do at Skill a Whale. We're a company that's entirely set up for this live team coaching, targeted, problem-based, experiential, feedback-based approach to learning. But we're also completely transparent about how we do it all. And so if people want to go and recreate it themselves, you absolutely can. So if you want a team to learn new skills really effectively, you firstly need to identify and break down the skill that's to be learned. So we talked a bit about React Native. If you're learning that, you probably also need to know JavaScript or TypeScript or both, and the kind of core bits of React that are common to both React.js and React Native. In each of those areas, you then want to break down almost like a syllabus of things that people need to know, from like, here's how variables work, here's the rest and spread operators, here's what the idea of a prop is in React, here's the idea of the text component in React Native. Then you want to assess whether each person in a group already can do that thing or not. That's really critical for being able to target the learning. And best ways of doing that look kind of like questionnaires, like quizzes, ideally ones that, where possible, ask people to write some code or answer a code-based question. From that, you can then work out exactly which bits of learning are required, which bits of those technologies do we care about on our team, and which bits of what we care about does each individual still need to learn. And then you can run sessions on those smaller, targeted, modular areas, invite just the people who need to learn that area, give them the information they need and a problem to solve, ideally in these very kind of tight feedback loops, so that you're building up the ideas across that hour, maybe 5 or 6 iterations between here's an idea, now write some code to solve a problem, in like those 5 layers across the session. And then what you'll see is people are learning the skills that you need them to have that they don't already have, and they are learning them in a very actionable, translatable way, as in they translate to work readily.
What about learning attitudes? How can leaders promote learning on their teams and actually get people excited about it?
So my experience has always been that people are very excited about learning and not at all excited about training. And I think that's because the default model, the model that we are used to, prioritize the time of the trainer. So if I'm a trainer, I can record a video and then I can give it to 1 million people, each of whom pays me a buck. And good news is I'm a millionaire. Bad news is everyone had to watch my video about stuff they already knew potentially. But those things still have value. They're just not the kind of skill-based learning that we're talking about. But that's why if we say, oh, we're undertaking this training exercise, your head will go to, oh, well, I signed up for that course and it was like 40 hours and there were the 3 hours of videos that weren't relevant to me. And then there were the 36 hours of videos that were like way beyond where I'm currently at. And there was like 1 hour of nugget in there that I had to really like dig around for. It's extremely passive as well. It's just an approach that lends itself to boredom. I think this is why those companies really struggle for engagement, right? It's why it's such a key measure of the MOOCs and the video libraries, is because it is quite hard to get people to keep coming back. It requires a lot of motivation. I think actual good learning is in itself feels very rewarding, because you immediately are like, I didn't know that thing before. And now I feel like the world's fucking expert at it. Like I've solved all these problems. I understand it really deeply. Someone who really knows their stuff has answered all of my questions and made the thing click for me, so that now I grok it and like I'm ready to go and solve problems with it. So I think actually the hurdle to overcome that I see is much more about methodology than about learning itself, because people like learning and people learn by accident. Even people have conversations about TV programs they watched last night, right? We are good at learning stuff and recalling it and being able to talk about it over a matter of like a 12-hour cycle, even when it's completely irrelevant to the thing we spend 8 hours a day doing. If you could make learning that was enjoyable and targeted, which is like, you look at research about what people say they want from learning, I think it's 97%, certainly 90+% of people say they want learning that is highly targeted to what they actually need, which suggests that that's not what they're getting already. I think as soon as you do that, you're a huge step towards it being enjoyable. As soon as you make it be about doing something rather than just absorbing information, you're another massive step closer. And so it might just be the case of getting people on board with the way that you're going to learn first. And then actually you won't face any friction at all with getting people to want to learn, because ultimately I think people do want to learn. They just don't want to be trained.
Well said. Hywel, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find Hywel on Twitter at H_Carver, or as the host of his own podcast for tech leaders, The Pod Presents, primarily context-based. Thanks for listening, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. Well, everyone, we will see you next week. And don't forget, if you haven't already, we are trying to get more reviews on Apple Podcasts. So take 2 minutes, give us a quick review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. 2 sentences, 5 stars, means the world to us. And thanks so much for listening.